because he worked in a place he really liked to be in, up on those old chalk downs. There's one spot in the valley just near here, Saltdean Valley, where he liked to be so much when he was up there working. He used to sit on a boundary stone and eat his lunch where he could look down through the valley to the sea. It was his favourite spot. Yeah, he liked it so much that he asked Dad if after he died he'd sprinkle his ashes up there. And that's what Dad did. And I've been up there with him many times to visit the place. You have to have a good imagination now to imagine it like it was when Jim was young, though. In fact, when he made a recording for the BBC back in 1951, he put it quite graphically. He said, "I still do like to walk up on those old hills where I was a shepherd boy, but they've changed today. They're all different now," he said. "You might see a boy today on a tractor with his jam and his spam sandwich." He said, "When I was a young man, we had to walk 10 miles behind the plough to plough an acre, and then we'd get home and have a good old ham bone and a bit of pork." "Yes," he said, "that's changed a lot today. When we was up there, we used to look down, and all you'd see was that sheep crop turf and the lovely curl of the downs, those lovely curling contours as it goes down to the sea. Reminded you of a female body. There was a grace and a beauty in these chalk hills round here in them days. But now you look down there, and all you see is houses, houses, houses."
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Simon Ryder. I'm the first artist in residence in the Observatory out the back of the Science Centre. And I just wanted to start with that because after Alex's fantastic trip through the universe, I felt we needed to bring ourselves back down to earth and back down to the downs where we are today. Just for those of you who don't know the project, the observatory is just out the back. After the two shows this evening, you can go out and have a look if you'd like. Two rotating, one's an open studio, one's a closed studio. Both of them can rotate to face whichever way you want. And, well, I've been in them for a few weeks now, and I've been keeping a blog of what I discover each day and what I'm working on. And one of the things that came to mind was something from my childhood. Because they rotate and show the artist working inside, and you can look out at the landscape.
It's Windy Miller. Hello, Windy. Are you busy? Plenty of corn to grind? Plenty of wind in your sails?
I was trying to think back. I don't think they ever had an artist in Trumpton or Camel Green. Windy Miller is probably the closest you get with the smock and everything. So yes, the observatory, this is the view from the front of it. And you can see it's very much almost like a funnel, a viewing tool. You can see straight through the back of it. There's a small slit, and it opens out, increasing it out in a funnel shape to the front and looks out. And it was one of the inspirations for the architects was a painting of St. Jerome in his study. And here's the picture. I found it quite disturbing in a way. I mean, this picture's, everything is focused in on the middle. That's not me, is it? No. Everything's focused in on the middle, and actually to look at the picture clearly I had to black out the middle of it. But you can see, I mean, look at the way the architecture is focusing in. Look at the way you can see through to the back. Look at the way at the front it's got a theatrical proscenium arch. I mean, this is very close to what the observatory feels like to be in. You're very much under scrutiny, but you're also looking out. You're on a stage, but you're trying to be a hermit and private. And it just zooms in and the focus is very much on you. So it was after a few days that I began to realise that you know, I'm taking the role of Saint Jerome in this residency. So as I said, I'm keeping a blog of the things I'm looking at, and I thought I would just spray them around the walls if we can. So could we have the first one, please? Which was the original designs for the observatory. And the second, which is where we are now. You can see the shape for the Science Centre. And the third, yes, okay, we'll come back to Philae in a minute. And the fourth one, well, we've met Windy Mill already. And the next one. Well, we're in a planetarium, and one of the things, very much the way I work, is that I focus on the place that I'm in. So we're here, a planetarium. It's fantastic to get the opportunity to do something in it. And at the moment, one of the focuses up in space is the Rosetta mission. And it's circling very close to this comet 67P, and a small little lander was dropped onto it, Philae, up there. And this entry, 28 minutes, 20 seconds, that's how long it takes for either us to send a message to Philae, to Rosetta, or Rosetta to send one back to us at the speed of light. That's how far away it is. And the next one, us looking at the construction, and the next one. So, where are we? Where is it? Where's the observatory? Well, there's the Science Centre, obviously, but sort of X marks the spot. And round here, one of the things very much is just scratch the surface, as they did when they put the observatory in, and you hit chalk very quickly. Underneath us is chalk, and if you go down to the lower level, one of the exhibits here is the chalkboard, where you can see the chalk right underneath this building, with, of course, the obligatory dinosaur, which no attraction is allowed to have. Yes. But scratch the chalk a little further, and you start getting into some interesting territory. These little creatures, they're sea creatures, submicroscopic, I'm talking very, very small, below a micron, a single cell. And, you know, you can see the effort. Look at the size of the thing. They start producing these things to put on their outside to protect themselves. And if you scrape them all off, the cell will immediately start producing these things again to protect itself. Here comes the next one. And if you look close, this is one example. So inside that mass of sort of armour plating is a single cell. And these small plates have been called coccoliths. And each species has something different. So that one's got the sort of radius with the cross, with 2 bars across. Another one has some that look like this. It's just astounding to think these single-celled organisms are going to all the effort to produce these. They're fused together, so they interlock, 2 plates interlock like that. And one of the things I like doing is going down to the very small level and looking at spaces and looking at bringing to light, bringing into vision things that we can't normally see. So for another project, I was intrigued with this stone. This is Portland stone. And down at Southampton University, they happen to have a fantastic X-ray room, in effect, where you can look inside this stone in great detail. And this stone, as you can see, is full of holes left by fossils. And when you do look inside this stone, and strip the stone away, and are just left with the air spaces. So what you're looking at now is the air inside those pieces of stone. You can spot certain shapes, curls, but this is all air spaces. These spaces were laid down in the Jurassic. So as the film goes further and further in, you actually end up inside this space that hasn't changed since the Jurassic time. And this is called pseudomorph. Pseudomorphs, unlike things in our culture which we're very familiar with, which change shape, shapeshifters, pseudomorph is the opposite. It will keep its shape, but change what it's made up of. So in this case, we started off with a mollusk with a shell, which was then died, went to the bottom of the sea, got covered. So that was the first material, the shell material. The shell was then fossilized, and so that was the second material that the shape took. Obviously, the inside of the shell got filled with sand as the body had decayed away. Sometime between the Jurassic and now, some acidic water passed through the rock and washed the shell away. So then you ended up with a rock with an empty shell space left inside it. And that's the air spaces you can see here. And I suppose being somewhat impatient, I felt like I needed to give geology a bit of a kick, speed it up a bit. So I wanted to take these spaces and move them on into their next incarnation, their next form, their next material. So with this scanning, I could extract one of the shapes from inside that stone and reprint it using 3D printing. And this is what I got. Now, pseudomorph is the technical term. Coleridge and the Romantics, they were very interested in this idea. Coleridge wrote a lot about waterfalls, how a waterfall maintains its overall shape, but of course the material that's passing through it all the time is changing. And for him, this was one of the key aspects of the Romantic ideas that he was working with, was how certain forms, certain shapes can maintain, even though what they're made up of is constantly changing, constantly being replenished. So looking in with these X-rays, I found myself being connected back to the Romantic movement of the late 18th, early 19th century. This, by the way, is an artificial waterfall by a contemporary artist called Olafur Elias, who built a number of waterfalls in New York. Okay, if we just continue maybe with the next slide. So there we've got the coccoliths. And the next one, please. So going back again to that, yes, I know, all these theatres are aimed this way, but actually I'd like to use the whole thing. So you might have to turn around in your seats a little bit. Now, we're in a science centre to do with education. And I propose this guy, as the patron saint of this institution. Thomas Huxley was a prime mover in getting science education going in Victorian times. He had a great reputation as an educator, as a researcher, and totally self-taught. And I think he would be a fantastic emblem, fantastic patron for an institution like this. But he was also interested in chalk. Now, admittedly, Boney M and Thomas Huxley aren't usual bedfellows. Thomas Huxley was renowned for his chalk and talk lectures. At that time, public education like that was with big public lectures. And he would come up on stage with a big blackboard, chalk piece in hand, and then fire off for a couple of hours on whichever topic it was. He wrote a really famous essay at the time called On a Piece of Chalk. And he starts with the piece of chalk in his hand from the chalk of England, and looks at it, thinks about it in terms of evolution, looks at what's inside of it, and then keeps going and keeps going. And then starts to look over in Babylon, in Iran, that area, where the Garden of Eden was supposedly, in the Bible, cited. And the Garden of Eden had 4 rivers in it, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And Thomas Huxley looks at the geology, because the Tigris and the Euphrates are still there, underneath these 2 rivers. And from this piece of chalk, he finds that there is chalk underneath the Tigris and the Euphrates. Therefore, chalk preceded the Garden of Eden. Therefore, evolution was the correct interpretation, not the Bible story. But I just love the way that he will start from something very local, very, very in his hand, that piece of chalk, and just slowly extrapolate further and further away until he's talking about creation and Eden. And this is something I started to pick up on, that what I'm interested here is exactly that dichotomy between the two. You know, here we are in the Science Centre, looking at things very much earthbound. A lot of the exhibits outside are to do with this world. And yet here in the planetarium, we are trying to stretch our imaginations, trying to travel as far away as we possibly can and understand these great, great distances. So maybe we just keep going with the next couple of... so the next one, the Asponian, there they are, in their 1970s glory. And, right, this brings us... This image here, which is one I posted up, very much links with the one up there. What got me onto all this, looking at this idea of how we can empathise, how we can, as it were, grasp and bring down into our realm something so distant, was the emotional reaction to Philae. I don't know if you've been following it, Twitter and a lot of other things, but when Rosetta got close to Philae, sorry, start again. When Rosetta got close to the comet, 67P, it does have another name, but I'm not going to pronounce it. This was the images that we got. This is all. This is. I haven't degraded these. This is literally the resolution. That's Philae dropping down onto the comet. And I don't know if you know, it landed, but I think the little claws that were meant to go into the surface didn't work, so it bounced. And because the gravity over there is so little, it bounced for a few kilometres, I think, and then bounced again. And instead of ending up on a nice sunny part of the comet, where its solar panels would work and it could keep functioning for a long while, it ended up right at the foot of a cliff, in the shade. And so, after a few days, Philae died. It couldn't function anymore. And the outpouring on Twitter, here we've got, Philae, sir, if you don't mind meeting me, I'll close down now for a while. Sure, go ahead. Thanks, little one. You did good. Or down here, you know, I don't want poor Philae to shut down. I want to know what happens next. What's a cliffhanger? I was intrigued by this emotional connection to this little abstract piece of machinery going to a cold piece of, it's not even rock, I think, it's a mixture of rock and ice, or probably mainly ice. You know, millions of miles away. And then I started looking at some of the images that were coming back. And I don't know why, but my first reaction was this. It was sort of almost, I felt like it was a sandy beach with a small cliff, and I could imagine myself down in Cornwall, having just got out of the sea, putting my towel down out of the wind and sitting there and warming up and or reading a book or whatever. But I was intrigued by how these images, I was even starting to make connections with these images. The whole thing gets blown out of the water when you know that these little rocks down here, I think, are probably a couple of kilometres high. So the cliff is vast. But I mean, it's not the point. It's seeing these landscapes from this incredibly distant, alien world. There's another one, and that's my little beach there with the cliff edge. And as it gets closer to the sun, it's going to disintegrate more. The heat from the sun, I think, will be sort of, it will fall to pieces, and you can see these streams of material flying off it. And here are some, it's rotating in space, so. So quite apart from the science, what are we going to make of this emotionally? What are we going to make of this in terms of art? What is this comet? What is Philae? How does it relate to what we are down here? And how can we, in some way, get a grasp on it and understand what it's about? You know, they've even got a 3D model of it, which you can then print at home. You can print yourself a little comet about this size. Here it is. I'm working on this at the moment. And this is the sound from it. This is another interesting thing. It doesn't make a sound. Philae doesn't make, not Philae, the comet doesn't make a sound. I believe, if I understand science right, this is the magnetic field around it changing, and they've sped it up enormously. But as soon as we have a sound to go with it, this comes from that comet. There's a connection made. Which has brought me back to thinking more about the Romantics. and the idea of the sublime. The Romantics reacting to the Industrial Revolution and bringing back the person, bringing back emotion, bringing back the personal connection with whatever subject it is. And the idea of the sublime, this sense of both wonder and terror at something so vast, so overwhelming, yet so exhilarating at the same time. This is Caspar David Friedrich's The Wanderer. But just beginning to think about repositioning him and applying the sense of the sublime, this romantic idea. But today the sublime seems to be more to do with data, to do with distance, to do with, rather than obviously directly experiencing, to do with this distant exploration and what we can make of it. And reinterpreting the way we look at landscapes is something I've worked with before, with another rock. This is a hand-sized piece of rock from this river on Dartmoor. And I was working on the project again with data, but working with the landscape, but not wanting to look at the landscape in the traditional romantic visual sense. Thinking what other ways can we respond, can we see the landscape that's around us. So I started walking across this landscape, but strapped up with a lie detector, measuring my skin response, galvanic skin response, measuring my heart rate, measuring my breathing, measuring my temperature as I walk through, just simply on the idea that, you know, you may be looking at a fantastic landscape, thinking, wow, and your body's going, boring. But somewhere else further on, you and your body are responding much more to it. Now, yes, some of it's physical when you're walking up a hill, but galvanic skin response is something else. That's more connected to an emotional response. So if you take that stone out of the Dartmoor River and scan it into the computer, get its shape, and then squeeze it one way, depending upon your skin response. Squeeze it another way, depending upon your breathing. And squeeze it a third way, depending upon your blood flow. That stone starts to turn into something like this. This is my romantic drawing of the landscape. And so I'm working with ideas of great distance and how to bring them very close to ourselves, how to in some way grasp these things. So if we continue with some more of the blog entries. Yes, here we have a world, Minecraft, this virtual world where you can go in and build anything you want. I went in thinking I'd like to try to build the Comet, to find someone already done it. So Comet 67P is already in Minecraft, built in these blocks. Next. Oh yes, that was just one about the charcoal. If you come out to see the observatory, it's covered with charcoal on the outside. It's a part of the technique. Next one. This is actually a piece of agate, but I was thinking about flint on that day and possibly working with flint. And the next one, please. And that brings us back to the picture that we looked at earlier. So the way I work is to do this sort of research, to look around the whole site, and then from this start distilling ideas, start distilling things that I'm interested in, and materials I might be working with. And so at the moment it's working on ideas to do with the romantics, to do with this sense of the sublime, but bringing it up to date, and working on how we might connect with these incredibly distant, incredibly beautiful, inspiring, but not sure what we want to do with them, these distant planets, these distant stars. So that's the way that the work is going at the moment. And I don't know how many of you know the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick's. He makes this wonderful connection between our own evolution and then up into space. Can you clear them back? And if you are in space and look back down on the Earth, and you've got the tip of Cornwall just over there, and France here, and you look out into the sea in the summertime, you can see this, these vast areas of white. And these vast areas of white are these. They're coccolithophores that bloom in the summer and get so vast in numbers that you can see them from space. And when you have enough of these together, you make the chalk that's under our feet. These are what make up our chalk. And this one is particularly relevant, as the name might suggest. Thomas Huxley was the first man to see these, and he named them coccoliths. And this one has been named after him, Emiliania Huxleyi, or as the researchers down at the Oceanographic Centre in Southampton call it, E-Hux. And Thomas Huxley has another role in this talk as well, because the talk that went before, or the show, was to do with the universe, and the talk that's, or the film that's about to follow us, is all to do with Darwin and his voyage on the Beagle. And Darwin was quite reclusive and certainly not one for public debate. And when there was the big debate at Oxford with Wilberforce about evolution, it was Huxley who stood up for Darwin and stood for his ideas, and that's why Thomas Huxley became known as Darwin's bulldog. So this man not only could be the patron saint of this science centre, but he would also be a good introduction to the next film. And I'm going to be out in the observatory until the middle of March, working on these ideas and beginning to produce the work for the show, I think in the autumn time. So do come out to see the observatory. And then after me there's another artist called Sean Harris, and then there's Isabella Martin. And there'll be an artist in the observatory all the way through to the middle of June. Thank you.